There's so much I love about Chicago's history. It's so multi-layered. I think my favorite thing about Chicago's history is that we're responsible for everything dope about America. Like everything cool about America was either made in Chicago or made better in Chicago. And I think that's why I'm disseminating history on TikTok and on Twitter. I want people to have a better image of Chicago versus the stuff that's out in the national media, you know?
I think what people are not seeing in the south and the west sides of Chicago is Chicago, frankly. And speaking now, again, as an immigrant myself, very quickly, as soon as I set foot in Chicago, I was told, don't go to the west side, don't go to the south side. And our friend Tanika Johnson, photographer, tells the story better than anyone else, and we've talked about this. And I was surprised because when people told me this, both as a planner, because I was a city planner, and also as an immigrant, I was asking back and saying, why are you telling me not to go to 2/3 of the city, right? And nobody really want to unpack some of that, right? So I had to unpack it on my own, and talking to people from those communities that would tell me, oh no, what you're hearing is fear from folks who often don't even go there, have never gone there, and there's a mythology that has developed. It's almost multi-generational mythology that is keeping Chicagoans from enjoying their own city, which is heartbreaking to me, that you would call yourself a Chicagoan with such pride. For me, just working through Elevated, I've gotten to learn a lot about the North Lawndale, Garfield Park, Woodlawn, Washington Park. Logan Square was my first community when I moved here, so I already knew a little bit about it. And the amazing architecture, food, people, art, activism, stories, the layers there.
Oh my goodness, if this was church, I would be standing up clapping, I would have been waving, all kind of flags, you were preaching to the choir for sure. That bothers me so much, and what's sad, again, something to be fixed, you have to recognize that our institutions used to do that. I believe now if you're going to see the Chicago Tourism Board website, you're not going to see go to, Brown Sugar Bakery on 75th Street. You're not going to see go to Soul Vegan. Like that whole 75th Street corridor is full of black-owned businesses that could use the tourism. What people won't tell you is that by virtue of Chicago's policies, the people on the south and west side are our first preservationists, right? Because of redlining, you couldn't get a new structure built. But now the Queen Anne architecture that you see, everybody's like, spend $1 million on it, right? The west side line is moving west every decade, You see hipsters on Western, right? In my day, you wouldn't have saw that, right? The line was way, way, way further to Damon. But they're coveting those spaces because they were preserved, right? And that's a South Side story that I'm so into telling.
For me, one of the most beautiful things that we do in Elevated is to bring neighbors to build community together, and also to build actual bricks and mortar together. For us, creating community near transit starts by getting the community together first, right?
We all have pride in our train stations, You identify in Chicago with like what Catholic parish you're from, what high school you went to, or what train station you're nearby. Those are your three identifying markers as a Chicagoan. It's almost like your Chicago quiz. You fail those three, I know you're from Naperville, Like how you get downtown, right? You guys to come quick, 67, red line, blue line, green line, pink. You guys to say something to me, right? I'm able to move around Chicago before the days of a GPS, right? A lot of that was due to the fact that I was familiar with bus lines. So once I did get my bearing, I knew which buses would get me back home, which buses would get me downtown, which buses would get me to the place that I was going to. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. When I was bored, I would take the number 44, which is the Racine bus. They've cut so much of it now, but it used to run from 87th Street all the way to Merchandise Mart. And so that is a lot of demographic shifts. In the 90s, some of the factories were still around. I watched the stockyard, go abandoned, and then now it's reintegrated with different type of companies. I seen the International Amphitheater. I was seeing Biggie Smalls there. I seen it get tore down. All from that Racine line. But then it would turn on Wallace, you know, I seen what used to really stick out to me is how identical the neighborhoods look, right? Because of the 1909 Chicago plan, how it was laid out, how the lots was laid out, and how much better some of the neighborhoods would look than mine, even though like it was the same thing, right? It was just 20 bungalows on each side of the street, but theirs just looked so much better. Their street just looked so much better. You know, I noticed a lot of that.
So let me tell you how cool it is to hear somebody who knows the bus lines and who navigates through buses, because it's not very common, right?
I think it's hard in Chicago because Chicago was laid out because of the car, right? We learned not to the importance of alleys after New York, so we made sure that we included alleys in all of our plans. But then right as the neighborhood started to grow, right as we were at our most prosperous, that's when Henry Ford had streamlined the making of the car. And so Chicago was designed for the car. That's why every bungalow and two-flat had a garage. You don't see that in any other city as they built out, right? If you think about that, the neighborhoods have driveways or garages. Every single Chicago neighborhood that has a bungalow on a two-flat, it came with it because it was designed for the car. It was designed for one car. And so I think maybe returning to that, and they had that in mind for the Chicago plan too. Like it was designed for one car. You know, that's why there isn't a lot of parking on your street, because it was designed for one car, one home type of thing. Now you got three cars out there. So it's ridiculous. But they also were very meticulous in laying out the bus lines and the train lines and the train stops. That's how the neighborhoods developed. The initial onset of the neighborhoods were the train stops and the train depots. Most neighborhoods identified by what the train stop was called. The train stop named the neighborhood in a lot of instances. So just a return to that is just really returning back to what worked. And I'd say it's very hard to eliminate cars here in Chicago. You were just mentioning the racist policies. A lot of our expressways were laid out in a way to promote racial division in the city. But in doing that, they eliminated the ability for someone who doesn't have a car to get to work in certain pockets of the city. And so while I would love to encourage the folks of, say, Roseland to be more green, walk, ride a bike, right? I sincerely mean that. I can't really let that come out of my mouth because I know that there isn't a train. You know, you got somehow, if you're on 115th Street, get to 95th Street to even get on the train. To combat that, you put some opportunity in those areas, some jobs, job readiness in those areas, and then I think you'll have more people able to use public transportation because they'll have maybe more ridership, or have them extend the times. When the neighborhoods were of a different demographic, you can get on the bus any time of night, right? And that's not the case either. So they used to have lines that extended to the suburbs. They cut in those. And if you don't have a college degree in Chicago, you're going to probably have to work in the suburbs. Right?
I understand some communities don't have the transit assets, so the families need a car, right? So we are not about saying anti-car everywhere, but some neighborhoods for sure are underutilizing their transit assets, and there's a lot to unpack there. Part of what Elevated is doing is to bring development and transit together, because our policies, as you were mentioning, are not welcoming to build around transit. Yeah. They're more car-oriented than transit-oriented. You'll see probably more gas stations next to train stations than affordable housing next to train stations, which doesn't make sense at all, right? But that's in the codes, and it's in the rules. It's in the zoning of Chicago, and part of the work that we've been doing in partnership with the mayor's office is to start changing those rules and make it harder for car users to place themselves in the precious land around transit.
Absolutely.
And find other places for those. And land near transit should be sacred for equitable uses, for affordable housing, for small businesses, for community centers, for green spaces. But it's hard because, as you pointed out, from the very beginning, planners and politicians, developers built for cars, right? And so here we are.
That's you make a good point. Thankfully, I got to go to the Hall of Fame enshrinement for Kobe Bryant. It was in Connecticut at Mohegan Sun Arena, And so it was all like Route 2, Route 3, whatever. So I asked someone from Connecticut, like, hey man, where's the interstate? He's like, when they were building it, we didn't let them tear up our houses. And so to get to the interstate, you gotta like drive 20 minutes whatever way. And so I was like, oh man, that's inconvenient if I'm trying to go somewhere quick. And then you love this, I'm telling you. He said, that's what buses are for. Right?
Exactly. Going back to that sense of we are all one city and one neighborhood or one community, that I think things like the car separate us,
Yes.
right? The car is a personal, individual space, right? And there are people who can go from their home, and I have friends who go from their home to their work and to their, restaurant and back home, and they never get to interact with anybody or even see, other people but themselves, right? When you take the train or the bus, you are seeing a lot of things and you're hearing a lot of things, and then you get to talk to others and you get to be integrated. But I think part of the reason we believe in public transportation is because it creates community too, right? And the stations themselves, we look at them not just as a stop, but also as almost like a civic center,
Yeah.
right? It's like a station area here in Kedzian Lake. You see there is the hatchery here. There's a lot of folks hanging out around the train station and in the hatchery itself. And there is a market that happens here on Saturdays that the Garfield Park Community Council convenes. So this is just not a stop. This is a community space, right? Not all of the train stations in Chicago are like that. And so our role is to get to more, Kedzian Lake type stations that feel like this.
So those are also connecting points in the city, and I think connections bring better perspective, and then perspective provides more of a feeling of ownership, whether you're next to it or not, right? If you got a better perspective of the people that are on 79th Street, then you start to ask, like, why isn't the 79th Street train station better, or why isn't there affordable housing closer to the train station, right? And you'll start to ask those questions no matter what side of town you're on by connecting yourself to people who get off on the 79th Street train stop, right? Like the more you talk to them, you might be talking about the new train station that they fixed on Kedzian Lake, right? You're talking to somebody like, oh man, those type of exchanges promote the type of change we need here in Chicago, and it gets the ball rolling, it gets conversations rolling. Because I do believe in public transportation. It's safe, right? I think the one or two incidents that happen on the bus get so embellished that it makes it almost seem like it's not a safe thing. A lot of people are looking out for each other on the bus. And then there's a lot of kinship. Like I said, I'm so into perspective, and a lot of perspective is gained and corrected in spaces like on a train or on a bus.
There's a lot of pride in being a Chicagoan. There's also a lot of shame in the awful things that happen in Chicago, and some people really know how to bring those two together, and others get stuck on one or the other. And so that energy, I think, is what informs a lot of the work that we do, because we want to find out where are those areas of pride, right? And how do you elevate the pride of our neighborhoods, but also let's talk about that shame. Let's talk where that comes from and unpack,
Right.
some of the history that people don't want to talk about.
I think the shame is what prevents us from moving forward, because in order to move forward, you got to acknowledge that it happened, right? You got to heal your cut. You got to acknowledge that you're bleeding. And so when you don't do that, you tend to let things get affected, and then it looks ugly.
Yeah, I see people like you as part of the therapy team that we need
that's nice.
for all of us to start analyzing all that collectively. And there's not a lot of people who know how to facilitate that type of conversation.
Well, thank you. That's a very awesome compliment. Because I'm really, really after your pride. I'm not after your shame at all, right? I don't. That's not why I'm talking. That even when the subjects are heavy, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm not trying to leave you with the shame. I'm really hoping that the information I'm providing will give us an opportunity to find a way to find the road to pride.